Okay, welcome to the 2020 Ham Exposition New England ARES Academy webinar series. I'm Steve, W1EAR, located in Amherst, New Hampshire, the producer of today's session. Your presenter today will be Carey Heckman, W1EAR, the EC for West-Central New Hampshire, and a longtime presenter at the ARES Academy. His topic today will be net control, the second part of the ARES basic track. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom or top of your Zoom screen, and we will address questions not answered in the presentation at the end to avoid disrupting the flow of the webinar. Thank you for attending, and it's all yours, Carey.
Thank you, Steve, and good evening, everyone. Glad you could join me, and this is really a fun thing. So I will confess from the very beginning, I'm a net control junkie. I really enjoy being net control. And I think it's really an adventure. And I call for this presentation a mastery adventure. It's a great chance to learn more and become better and keep improving, keep doing a better job at what we have to do. So it's a really exciting kind of a thing. So my question for you is, who's up for an adventure? And hopefully that's you, because that's why you're here. If you're ready to take on something that's going to be a lot of fun and can really be a chance of accomplishment for you to take care. Now, there are some definite issues about being a net control station. We face, without one, lots of things can happen. So it's a big, hairy, audacious problem we have with some underlying problems and causes. One thing is, you'll see in this example, this analogy that I'm drawing, there are poor physical conditions, there's not enough cooperation, and it requires coordination because the people involved are not able themselves to see everything and to make the decisions necessary to figure who goes when. Very similar to stuff we face on a net. So if there was a physical representation of what happens on nets with no net control or a poor net control, I think that pretty much visualizes what it looks like. Lots of people running around, getting angry with each other, getting frustrated, falling down in the mud. In our case, might be the mud of the noise, and things not being accomplished, a big backup, a big traffic jam. Not what we want to see in terms of communication. And you can be the key to the solution to this problem as a net control station. A net control station is the radio operator who makes this all possible, who enables the stations to communicate, to exchange messages, to get the message through. You can do so with reliability, and that's the most important part, is that what takes place is reliable, and also with security and with speed. And we'd also like to see accuracy and brevity. All those things contribute to what we're trying to get there. So by using your traffic control and net discipline enforcement skills, that's how you make it happen. And the better your skills get, the more learning and practice and reflection you can have, you can become a master at this and really make the experience of being, Steve, do you see this?
Yes.
Steve?
Carey, yeah, I'm seeing your slide.
Okay, this person says they're not seeing the slide. I'll just go on. Unless somebody else complains, I'll assume there's something about him that's special. Okay, so here are our goals as a master net control station. First and foremost, we want to get the traffic through. That's our biggest objective, is can we actually get things to happen. At the same time, if we can, we want to train by learning by doing. That includes ourselves, some real-time situation problem solving. Things come up like screens that can't be seen, but not like that, but different things that happen on the radio. And then others, that's another part of the thing. We'll talk some more about this idea of practice makes permanent, but you are training them. The big thing is a matter of the flow, the pace of the net. It shouldn't be rushed, but it shouldn't be boring. There should be an idea that things are moving along briskly, but not in the sense that it's hectic or nobody can follow along what's happening. And then there ought to be a feel. It should feel like you're in charge, but you're not pushing things. That you're confident and with authority, but you're friendly. yet you're still also in control. And you're a professional, but you're also comfortable and having fun. You're not too slick, and you're not too confused and bumbling either. These are all very hard things to know to achieve in the middle. That's part of the mastery struggle. Can you get better and better having these things? And you are firm, but you're patient. And it's really all up to you. You read anything about being in net control, and it emphasizes the net control has total responsibility and authority. You are the boss, as long as you keep it that way. You have to maintain control. You can't allow arguments. You can't allow unregulated operating to take place. You have to stay, you're the guy who is the coordinator. Your most powerful weapons. First of all, it's going to be the tone of your voice. Do you sound like something who knows what they're doing? Do you use a tone that says this is what needs to be done? You don't want to be too forceful, but you don't want to be, too loose either. You're not trying to be their best buddy, but you're not trying to be their slave driver either. The next part is using correct procedure. This tells people you know what you're doing. If you don't use the correct procedure, they begin to wonder themselves whether you're really a good person to follow, you're somebody who can take care of this. And as I mentioned before, this idea of flow and feel. How's the pace? How does it move? Does it move consistently? Does it move in a regular way? And how does it feel? Does it feel like they're being pushed? Do they feel like you're in charge and you're doing a job of taking care of this, you're moving around? So again, let me confess, I love serving as a net control station. I think it's one of the most fun things I do. I've done it for quite a long time now, and I enjoy it every time. I never think I've done it perfectly, but I really enjoy it. And the best times you finish, you go, I'm actually quite drained. It takes a lot of concentration for me to do this, but at the same time, it's a great feeling when you're done. You go, that was a good show. That really came off well. Got it done. Things moved along. Everything is great. So here's a master net control station at work. And I list for you these 6 P's of things for you to look for in this next little clip. One is the idea of gaining perspective, that it's somebody who gets into a position where they can see what's going on. You may recall that part of the problem with the previous clip was that none of the soldiers who were driving could see the other people very well. They were too low of a level. So if you can't hear people on your net, you're gonna have a hard time having the right perspective. The second P is projection. So that's the idea that you can lead with a commanding tone. You're loud, you have a good voice. Second of all is professionalism. You understand, in this case, he understands the vehicle's capabilities, you understand station capabilities, you understand propagation, you know who can hear whom, you hear who's got the right stuff, who has the right equipment, who can handle what you're talking about. The next is personality. You actually take command. You're not there as some weak figure, you really are taking command. There's also an idea of partnership. You find a way to connect, in this case with drivers, in your case with people on the net. So you're working together. And finally, there's the idea of perception. In the case of the clip, the drivers trust the decisions. In our case, it's that the people who are participating in the net trust our ability to make the right decisions. They're not second guessing. They don't think there's something going wrong or something that's just not appropriate to what's happening. So let's watch this master net, whoops, bad boy. Let's watch this master net control station at work.
Let's pay attention. Don't clean this mess up right now. Let's move this vehicle out this way. This one out this way. Back that thing up there. And we'll take this one here. All right, get up off your ass. Let's go now. That's it. That's the way. All right, come on. Come on now. There we go. Come on. That's it. That's it. Gun it. Gun that thing. Okay, come on. Watch it. Go, go, go. Come on. Hold it up. Come on, baby. Yeah, yeah. Come on. That's it. Come on now. Come on. Keep coming. Keep coming. Hold it up there. Now, come on. Hold it. Hey, dummy! Hold the friggin' thing! Nice! That's it, come on. Good boy.
So I really think that short clip, you see all these things. He gets up on the stump for perspective, but he needs to see better how the turret of the tank or how the cannon might get in the way. He gets off the stump and he looks to see where it is. He's projecting. He certainly has a loud voice, and he certainly is in command. He's very professional. He seems to have done this before. He has the right arm signals. He uses his crop in the right way. He definitely shows some personality. He shows he's in partnership with the drivers, and he responds to them and goes back. There's really a conversation he's having with them. And I certainly think they perceive him to be in command, and they trust him. They drive forward. He says drive forward no matter what they can see. He believes he's not going to get them into trouble. There you go. That's a master net control station. This really is the key to everything, is the idea of, being prepared. The more prepared you are, the more it's going to work. So what do we mean by being prepared? It's really, I would encourage you to have a checklist, just like you were a pilot, so you can make sure you have these things all in shape. One thing is your equipment. Make sure it's ready. If you have something with tubes, warm them up if that's necessary. Nothing worse than net control that starts out on the net frequency and starts to drift. That drives everybody crazy. Make sure you've already tuned. Not the time to tune up is not after the net starts. If you have to tune, do it before with the right identification. You should confirm that you have the right frequency and the right antennas. I don't want to tell you the number of times I've seen net controls have a hard time starting the net because they were on the wrong antenna and nobody could hear them, or they were on the wrong frequency or on the wrong sideband. Those are things that ought to be confirmed before the net starts. If your net uses digital communications, like something, FL Digi or whatever, make sure that's already launched and working, and confirm that it's operating correctly. Do a little test. Make sure it's transmitting. These days, it's not hard for a codec to slip out of line or whatever, and you're not connected to the right place. You need to check it to make sure that it works when it needs to work. And then, especially if you're learning, I would encourage you to have a voice recorder. They're not expensive, easy to get, so you can record yourself and have a chance to then reflect later. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's a great chance for you to learn what's going on. In addition, if you're just learning now, I'd encourage you to record some nets for your own use, and to listen to those and hear the procedures, find the things that were done incorrectly, find the things that were done right. Second part of being prepared is to prepare for the time. You ought to calibrate your PC, do that synchronization thing fairly soon before the net, so you're on the right time. Again, nothing wrong, nothing good about being 2 minutes late because your clock was wrong. The third thing is about our supplies, having those at the ready. So I would say pencils rather than pens, but if you're a pen person, I guess you can say pens. You want message forms to be ready. You want a logbook to be ready. You're going to be expected to log in people as they check in and log them out, and then log the traffic. Whatever you need, you might need a pad, whatever the things are you need to use to keep track of things and to be in a position to do the right stuff as you're going along. The fourth thing are operating aids. One might be a frequency list, especially if you're a kind of net that delegates people to move to other frequencies to handle traffic. That's going to be really helpful to do that correctly. And if you have a script, it's not a script for your preparation, but a script for net control, you should use it. For me, the best bet was doing this on 3x5 cards, because I could actually spread them out and pick the card for whatever situation was arising, like assigning traffic or checking more people in the net. I had my words right there. Now, of course, over time, you'll be able to liberate yourself from that. You'll be free of it because you'll have learned this stuff, but it'll be off to start out someplace. Another part of your preparation is to eliminate distractions. Turn down any scanners and other receivers. One thing I did tonight before the seminar is I unplugged the telephone in this room, because I never know when these silly telemarketers are going to call, and didn't want that to interrupt us. So I've made sure that's not going to ring. You should ask a family member to answer the phone if you can, or at least turn off the ringer. And if you have a dog, it's not really good to have them barking, because that's not good to have that on the air. So watch out for dogs as well. And finally, get your attitude on. Your attitude of being, I am competent, I know how to handle this, I'm going to take care of things, I'm going to be thoughtful, I'm going to listen, I'm going to be friendly, but I'm going to move along, and we're going to get the job done, or to get to work. So that's preparation. Preparation, like in everything else, is the whole thing. Fortune favors the prepared. All right, your basic operating techniques. I think it's really important to start on time. Starting on time tells everybody you mean business. You're not kidding around. I wouldn't wait for stations, or let's get more stations on. They should know that if they don't come on time, you'll have already started. I would keep transmissions as short as possible. You want to try to be brief and succinct, get the message through, but don't waste words. As I said, use a script until you're comfortable. That's not a problem. It's okay. Use the correct procedural language. It actually matters, especially if you're doing a high frequency, an HF net, where we have static and we have fading and lots of other conditions. Procedural language has a number of advantages. It's condensed, but also the people listening kind of know what to expect. So if they only hear part of it, they can fill in the blanks. And that's one of the greatest things of how you do that, is that you will be able to get more things through by using that language. Another thing is to listen carefully. That's one of the hardest things about being a net controller is your head has to be in about 3 positions at once. You have to listen to what's going on, you prepare for the future, and you have to know what you have to do moving forward. So there's a lot of things that are happening you have to keep straight. And that's the fun of it, but it's also the hard part of it. You need to leave space when you are talking to the net for break-in and for check-in, so people can actually have a chance to do that. And don't be afraid to ask for assistance if you need it. Don't be afraid to ask for others to provide relays or things like that, because that's okay. You can do a team effort. I mean, you may not be able to hear everybody, other people can. It's okay. So this will be convenient. Let's talk about some of the special challenges we're bound to face. I'm not sure I'll cover all the kinds of people, and if you have other special problems, we can talk about that during the Q&A. But there are certain kinds of people that are participants that seem to be common to our nets. One is kind of the untrained observer type. I'm not sure why I call it observer, but at least the untrained person. It's somebody who comes in and kind of bumbles around and doesn't get it right and breaks up the entire flow of your net. I would encourage you to be gentle, to compliment whenever you can, give them some positive reinforcement. You can find a way to teach them without letting it know you're teaching them. That can be a helpful thing to do, because most people get a little ticked off if you're trying to teach them, especially if they're older than you are or they're adults. They don't really want to be taught. But if you can give them sort of some cues, they probably will follow it without losing face. That's a good thing. If the person gets in the way, you can ask them to stand by and return to them after the work is done. So if they're really causing problems by being kind of fumbling around, you say, stand by, and there you go. This can be an opportunity to train and to retrain the net, because you can use these to remind people of things and in the process of what happens. And sometimes if you just say nothing, that could be a good thing. Sometimes the person will go away if you just ignore them. But this is one thing we see. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the irate participant. And I've seen some of those too. They get really mad about something and never quite sure what it's about. So one thing is slow down. Don't respond immediately. Don't take it as a personal threat. Don't let them get that kind of a platform. Take it easy. If possible, see if you can take the discussion online. Let me see if we can solve this on the phone. I'll give you a call after the net. And that way everybody else doesn't get involved with it. If they raise some sort of a problem, like, there shouldn't be people in this net who don't know anything about digital transmission, you can say, I agree, that certainly it'd be great if we had more people understood digital transmission. Thank you very much. That's great. You can empathize with them. I can appreciate why you feel that way, what things are going on. A little bit of that may be okay. And then just move on. You got to find somebody to get there. Occasionally, you may also have intentional interference. I'd say you need to ignore it. The basic adage is don't feed the bear. People who do intentional interference, they want the attention that you're there, they're causing a problem. But what do you do if it persists? It's getting in the way of your net. Simple, change the frequency. Hopefully you have alternate frequencies you can use, and it's even better if they're in a code, and you say, all net, change to frequency mic 13. Hopefully your interferer doesn't know where that is, and you're good to go. So my idea is don't do confrontation in the middle of the net. Don't bog things down. Don't get entangled. Try to find some way to keep moving, but to keep people learning and to not offend people if possible. Okay, some habits to avoid. Unfortunately, I've seen all of these things one time or another when other people have run nets. First of all, try to curb your tendency to think aloud on the air. Let me say, what do I do next? Oh, that was good. Let's try something else. Don't need the narration. Not a helpful thing. That's not being succinct or expedient or accurate or following procedure. None of that is a good idea. Don't speak without planning your message in advance. Know what you're going to say. You have time to think about it and do it. This is not a place for rambling commentaries. We don't need to find out what's going on with the Eagles who are on some remote website or something. It's not for you to start talking about the weather or how nice the day was. You've got business to do, get the business done. You shouldn't talk just to pass the time. As I alluded to at the previous part, don't get involved in on-air arguments or criticism. Take them offline, find a way to bypass it. You shouldn't be shouting into your microphone. You're hopefully a good enough operator, you're not using cute phonetics. So you don't say things like, pears, honey, onions, whatever. You should use, ideally, there's a reason why we have the phonetics we are. The reason why we would say Papa, Hotel, Oscar, November, Echo, Tango, India, Charlie, Sierra, those have been designed for multilingual. They've been designed for bad conditions. There's a science behind those phonetics. You should take advantage of that science. You should definitely identify every time you key or unkey your mic. Although I think there's some room to not be perfect about that, but it's not bad. Do not use, actually, I'm sorry, take it back. You should not identify every time you key or unkey your mic. There's no need for that. It's a habit you should avoid. You should use 10 codes. You should not use 10 codes or Q signals or any other thing besides plain language, because you don't know that everybody in the net understands what you're talking about. This is not a time to have sort of the inner club who knows all of your deep secrets of stuff. You should be using the stuff that actually is the most communication to most people. All right, after you're done, you're finished, you've relaxed, you've caught your breath again, your adrenaline's back down. I encourage you to review the recording. Figure out what you've done well, figure out what you could do better, and then determine how you're going to do better the next time. What are some things you might do that might make that better to do that sort of thing? And the most important way to do better is to practice. One way to practice is to listen carefully to others. That can be a very important way for you to have that sort of a thing. Another is to train as you plan to fight, meaning think about doing the things that actually will come up. And then finally, let me remind you that practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. So the more you repeat something, the more you're going to do it. So repeat mistakes, that's not a good idea. So try to be sure that what you're practicing is in fact the right thing. When in doubt, for any kind of a doubt, look it up. Don't be afraid to look it up. See if you can confirm that's the right terminology. Sometimes the words get twisted. Don't let that happen. Do not be the person that does that without thinking about it, and then you constantly make the same mistake. That's not good. You really want to practice. So here's the basic progression in terms of practice. You want to practice to move yourself from, if you've never been in net control at all and you're on this session, then you may well have some unconscious incompetence. You do things that are wrong, you don't know you're doing them. As you listen to recordings, you become more aware of you become conscious of your incompetence. That's the next step. Now, if you work on it, you can be conscious of your competence, but you're doing it very self-consciously. And the ideal is to move to the point where you can be unconsciously competent, where you do so many of the right things just by instinct, because you already know what to do. It's already preloaded in your brain. So that's what we're aiming for, is that kind of unconscious competence. So I wanted to give you an idea of what I mean by a net, how it kind of works. So here is the start. This is based on New Hampshire procedure. Your state may have something different, but I had to use something. So I will walk through this. This is how we were supposed to run a net, an ARES net in New Hampshire. And there'll be some things here we can talk about to sort of comment about some of these things. So it begins with a net call. In this case, this is net control, W1NCS, calling the New Hampshire ARES Section Traffic Coordination Net. And you do that 3 times. That gives people a chance to tune in. If they're a little bit late, they hear that. And also people know what it is, and they know they're in the right place. That's one of the most important things, is that people who come later need to know they've arrived in the right place and know what is going on. If there's just dead silence, that causes a problem for them. The next session gives a description of what this is about, reminds people our purpose. This is a directed net. It's used to coordinate message traffic between nets and to coordinate, in this case, New Hampshire ARES operations. Participation in this net is limited to net liaison and key served agency stations and ARES leadership. All their stations are invited to monitor and offer assistance when requested. So this is an interesting way of running a net. It has specific participants as opposed to being open to any and all comers. In this case, there are reasons for that, and that's the way it's set up. But other nets, of course, obviously run differently. Anybody can join in. And now we get the specification for how to check in. Please state your FCC call, your tactical call, and traffic status when checking in. Some of you maybe not be aware of what I mean by a tactical call as opposed to your FCC call. Clearly, your FCC call is what you've been assigned by the Federal Communications Commission. In these kinds of nets, we also have tactical calls. The tactical call is a call sign that's assigned to a function, not to a person. And as a result, it describes who they are. So they could be things like, fire safety. They could be state police control, or headquarters, emergency headquarters, or incident commands, things like that. Any different people could have that call sign, but it tells you who they are and where they are. And so that's can be an important part. I would say often it's more important to address people by their tactical call than by their FCC call, because that keeps straight who they are and what capacity they are operating. Of course, you have to still identify in accordance with FCC rules, but it's the tactical call that really does a lot more to inform people who's doing what. The next sentence is, all stations are reminded to log each station checking into the net. Think to yourself, why is that? Why should everybody keep a log of the stations checking in? Let's see if your answer is the same as mine. You should, because you never know when a net control station might fall off the air. There could be a power outage, there could be a change in conditions. Somebody's going to have to take over, and they need to know who's on the net to do that effectively. It's not the time to find out who's on the net when you take over out of nowhere because the net control has gone away. So it's another example of being prepared. Keep a log of the stations checking in. Now you know who's there. You could take over if necessary. So now we have check-ins. Any station with emergency traffic. Usually you start with emergency traffic. Please check in. And you pause and you wait. And if you don't hear anything, you wait, you hear something, you ask the question again. If you don't hear anything, then you say any relays. So that's helpful because other people may be able to relay in. Okay, nothing heard. And then now you ask for traffic. All other stations with or without traffic, please check in. So people who aren't have emergency traffic, you check them in. It's quite possible you would handle the emergency traffic before you get to this state. Probably not, because you want to know who's on before you start assigning traffic. But it is important to have the emergency traffic separate so you know what to do. So here's a tactical call, Lyme EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. And they're going to say, this is K1AAA, Lyme EOC. So we have their call sign, their tactical call sign, and they list one traffic for Orford EOC. And happily, sense of relief, we find the next caller in says Orford EOC. This is W1BB, Orford EOC. As a net control station, you say, phew, I've got a place to send that traffic. That's great. And then SNL says, this is W1CC, Section Net Liaison. So what do you say next? What's going to be your next move in this situation? Well, you're going to ask for relays. You're going to first acknowledge these three stations. Let them know they've been heard. You do not need to repeat what they said. You don't have to say what traffic they have. If you're saying you heard them, then you heard them. If not, you're supposed to ask. If you didn't ask, the presumption is you heard everything. And then you say, any relays? And so there again, let's say in this case, there are no relays, nothing heard. What do we do next? Well, we've got to do some net operation. You might actually assign an alternate net control station, not a bad idea. Okay, so now we're going to start some net operations. And you've decided the best thing first is to have the Lyme EOC. It's up to you in what order the traffic should go. It may depend on conditions. It may depend on your knowledge of the stations. You might know that the person who operates the Lyme EOC often has to go very quickly. You want to get it out of the way before they leave. That's you. Anyway, Lyme EOC, send your traffic. They came back and they call the other station. They say, Orford EOC, this is Lyme EOC. They announce how they're going to send it digitally, and they give this information. And they get a response from the Orford EOC, send. Very good. So we're all set, and they send the digital message. And hey, it all worked. That happens a lot, actually. And so Orford EOC, Roger. Oh, okay. I got an instruction I hadn't noticed before. Orford EOC, W1BB. And so there we go. That's Roger. So that actually calls another one. So the Lyme EOC says Lyme EOS, 1AA. I mean, it's all kind of flowing together. Let me interrupt for a second. There was a question I've been instructed to answer live. And it says, in my experience, one of the biggest challenges building nets is in effectively managing stations reporting themselves into the net. They often talk over each other and not express their call sign clearly. Any thoughts on improving this? there's not much we can do. It's just like in the situation with that traffic jam. They don't have an easy way of doing it. It would be nice if stations would start and then unkey so they could hear if somebody else was also calling. But that's a level of training we might not be able to attain. So it'd be nice if they said this is unkeyed so they could hear if somebody else was there, could avoid the doubling. But you're going to have doubling. So you simply say 2 stations for doubling. Hopefully you heard one of them a little better than the other and you call on them and then you call on the other. If not, you try again until it sorts itself out. It's not an easy answer with this stuff. It's just not the way it happened. So that's the nature of our beast. We can't see people. We can't send hand signals. So we have to just try again and do things. There also could be that you may find out that you don't even realize there's been a double. You've been talking. Somebody tried to log in while you were talking. It is often a practice that the participants will say double and let you know there was a double and that you need to sort of try again and sort of find out what's going on. All right, so there we go, Lime EOC net control. Go ahead, Lime EOC. They want to have a direct, in this case, means they want to have a direct conversation, not send traffic, but have basically a conversation with the Orford EOC. And the NCS, notice, has to give their approval. You are the traffic cop. People just don't talk. People just don't send traffic. They have to go through you. It's a controlled net. It's a directed net. Everything has to go through the net control station. So then net control says, go ahead, direct. So now the Lime station has authority. Calls the Orford station, calls Lime. Lime calls Orford. Orford responds. And there's a question. The food trucks arrived. When do you want them to go next? And Orford says, have them go to the community hall for a pickup. Okay, we're getting things done. This, by the way, is also traffic. Traffic doesn't only mean record traffic. Every communications is a message. So this is actually traffic as well. And so there we go. And that's done. And all right, so then we say, now Lime EOC, so Lime EOC now says the net with traffic for the section net. So now that's why we need our section net liaison. They're going to pick up the traffic from our net and take it to the section net. So Roger, now the net control is going to call them. And now he's going to direct a move. He's going to move to frequency 55 simplex and call the Lime EOC for traffic. This net, by the way, you may have noticed that they aren't saying over and out, is on a VHF, is on a repeater. That's not all nets are on repeaters, but these days a lot can be, and that can be very effective. So in this case, this is taking place on a repeater. That's why they're not saying over and out, because they don't need to. So it directs the stations to move and has them call them for the traffic. The stations acknowledge and say they are moving to the other frequency. So that's another kind of thing that takes place, and they're going to check back in when they're done. And you know they're there. You keep track of where everybody is, because hey, somebody else might come in with traffic for the section net liaison, and you can direct them to catch up with the SNL on 55 simplex. All right, we've now handled all the traffic. Net control says, any other stations with traffic? Doesn't hear anything. Okay, so there we go. It's all, it's all been done and it's all been taken care of. And so that's it. So then there's a closing. I mean, sometimes in some nets, there's a tradition of allowing stations to provide information. What have they been up to? What are they doing? That depends on the nature of the net. It's not all business, but we're human beings. We enjoy having some social interaction. If there's time and it's not any information that, as long as it's information that belongs on the air and it's not a violation of any rules or is inappropriate, that certainly is a pleasantry that can take place. And we end with a closing. This is tell everybody that things are up. This is net control, terminating this session of the New Hampshire's ARES section traffic and coordination net and returning the frequency to regular use. And you thank all the stations you participated, and then you declare yourself clear, and you're done. And then you take a big sigh of relief. You turn off your transmitter, you get a drink of water or coffee or something, and then you think about it. You start reflecting. How did it go? What happened? So that's really, I know it didn't take quite as long as you might have thought this would take, but let me say in conclusion, I'm happy to answer more questions, and hopefully there'll be a slew. Oh, I see there are more questions. I don't know where they are. So first of all, I encourage you to right now commit to becoming a master net control station. Don't satisfy to just don't do nothing and just be a participant. Don't satisfy to be kind of an amateur. Really try to become a master. I encourage you to listen, practice, stay patient. I hope you remember that your job is to enable networks to communicate with reliability, security, and speed by using traffic control and net discipline enforcement tools. That's your goal. And really take pride in your craftsmanship of a job well done. That's really the most important part of what this is about. And let me just remind you that if you're not growing, you're dying. Okay, let me see if I can see. Oh, there we go. With an iPad, you can take screenshots to capture what you want to remember. That's not a bad idea. That's something that I've never thought about, but sure, you could do that if there is something on the screen. I don't know if you're talking about for the presentation or in doing a net, but there are a lot of things that are on net screens these days. There's some digital stuff that can work. I believe this will be being recorded, and you will also be able to watch a recording if you want to see it again. Have I ever had emergency traffic on a net? Yes, I've had emergency traffic on a net. I'm not sure what else I can say about that. Yes, it has come up. People have had emergency traffic, and you've had to move it and take care of it. I love this a lot. One of our participants says the equip for him, directed net means mother may I, and I guess, or maybe it's Simon Says, and you have to wait for Simon Says, so that's fair. Also a great reminder, I did not mention this, and I probably should have. I was thinking more about a small section net or a small state net, but here's someone who's done international nets, not limited international nets, and they say it's occasional to section call-up groups and call them in smaller groups. 1 in your call, 2 in your call. Has a lot to do with the purpose of your net, but also to avoid those collisions that we were being talked about in the beginning. If you have a smaller scope, you'll get fewer collisions. There are a couple ways to do that depending on what you know about your participants. You could do it by location, all stations in New Hampshire, all stations in Maine, all stations in Vermont. You could do it by call sign, stations with call signs beginning Alpha through Bravo, Alpha through Charlie, Charlie through Delta through Echo. Whatever way slices it up into pieces that minimizes those pileups. It depends on how big your net is. I routinely check into a net with 124, 130 participants. Let me assure you, it checks in by groups. On the other hand, if it's a net of about 10 or 6, I don't think that's necessary. You don't have to do that. I hope the audio hasn't dropped out, but that's fair. Phonetics used on VHF units for clarity or no? Generally speaking, no, because there's no need for clarity. Generally on VHF, you have clear as a bell, perfect conditions. I have to say phonetics are appropriate when it's an unfamiliar word or there's some confusion about what the word might mean, then the phonetics might well make sense. I think with call signs, phonetics are really important because it's easy to get kind of lost and you're used to listening to phonetics. So I probably would I would tend to use phonetics with call signs. So I think it's a judgment call. It depends on what's working. Remember, our key is to get things done in a timely, productive way. And if you got to do it, you do it. But let's not put in excess stuff just for going through the motions. I hope that's a good answer to your question. Well, should you wait for them to come back to let them know the net had ended? Actually, the more important question, well, maybe not actually more important. Another question is, should you wait for the station to come back to let you know the traffic was passed successfully? Just because you sent them to some frequency doesn't mean they actually were successful. They really need to come back, one of them at least, has come back to you and report that they were able to pass the traffic, and depending upon your organization and the logging, perhaps even tell you at what time the traffic was passed. So you pretty much have to wait for them, or else you could go to them. If the net is over, you would go to 55 and say, how's it going? Is it done? Is there anything further? The net has closed, but you guys should keep going until you're finished, or let me know what the status is. So that's another choice. A number of operators, not everybody, but those who are fortunate, have transceivers that can do dual things. You can listen at the same time you're on one frequency while you're transmitting and listening to another frequency. And that can also be helpful to get an idea of what's going on. I didn't mention this, but another thing that's possible if you have multiple frequencies is to send stations to check the propagation on those frequencies, especially if you have frequencies that are distant. So they're on a different, a whole different band in a sense, different wavelength. Some days 40 meters is working and some days it's not. Some days 80 is working, some days 160 is working. If you have those frequencies within your control, it can be useful to go to the right frequency. There is no reason it's not a good idea to sit on the assigned frequency and suffer when, assuming people have the equipment, you can move to a frequency that works and get the job done. So that's that part of it. No, there is no follow-up procedure if traffic is, I guess I just described some idea about how it was done. There isn't a follow-up on traffic being delivered to the recipient. The normal assumption is, in most groups I am, is if you accept traffic and you rogered for it, you now own it. And it's your responsibility to see that, your responsibility to get it delivered. But there typically is not, I'm not familiar with a net that has that person reporting that they successfully delivered it or what happened to what they did. In most cases these days, our traffic, well, not every case, but a lot of cases, it goes to somebody who's on the air rather than a third party. But not always. Back in the old days, when I first got started, we were handling morale traffic out of Vietnam, and that we were treated like Western Union. People were giving us the message, we were delivering it to somebody. But that nowadays, generally speaking, we are handling the traffic internally for that thing. Okay, question is asked, how would the ARES nets in New Hampshire communicate, exchange traffic with other nets, assuming HF isn't reliable? Well, HF is always reliable somewhere, or at least almost always. But Connecticut to Rhode Island and Mass New Hampshire, that's where the section net comes in. So there'll be a higher level net that would have representative. Remember, we had a section net liaison. So they would be detailed. They would pick up the traffic from our state net, and then they would take it and they would list it on the section net. And there should be other representatives. There should be representatives from the other states who are there, and they would be there from Rhode Island. And they would say, I can accept the traffic from New Hampshire. So that's the way we've traditionally organized our nets, is in this hierarchy. This goes way back to 1914 and the founding of the American Radio Relay League, when Hiram Percy Maxim discovered that his station wouldn't go all the way to, I'm trying to remember where he was trying to get to, somewhere in Connecticut. He was in Hartford, of course, and he was going to Newington or somewhere near there. He was going somewhere, so he found a station in the middle, and he sent it to them, who then relayed it to the next person. And we are reenacting that in most of our nets today. There are technologies in wider and wider use. I'm thinking in particular of automatic link establishment, ALE, where multiple frequencies and possibilities, there's more it's more of a point-to-point, one-to-one type traffic handling, where you can actually find the station in many cases directly from you to they across the states. And you could actually get a message to California. You know, the weird thing about HF is that on many frequencies, it's easier to get a message to California from the East Coast than it is to New York. Because, and I've often in these kind of traffic situations sent traffic to Missouri or to California, and then they send it back to New York because that's where the communication is working. You gotta adjust to the conditions. You have to know the conditions, excuse me, and make the best of it and do what you can. Yes, there are lots of things on the web you can Google to find best practices or recipes on net control practices. There are other talks. There's a lot of that stuff that is available. I have no specific site that I would use. Be aware that there are different practices. People have customs. They do things differently. So you have to put on your critical thinking cap. And as you read things from other groups, think to yourself, does that make sense? Similarly, I find that HF nets on HF frequencies work differently than nets on VHF frequencies, so or UHF frequencies, on repeaters. So you want to make sure you're reading the stuff with that in mind and saying, nah, that doesn't work, or, oh, that's a really good idea. In general, the most important thing is to be consistent. Most of these rules are arbitrary. There is not a massive reason for them. It's just one way so that everybody is consistent. I think one of the most important things as you're learning is to listen. And this is no different than lots of other things. You should go to the net and just listen and record and listen again and see how they did things and try to get into the flow of how they do things, the terminology they use, and how they behave. The better you can fit in, you know, it's a little bit like dancing. As long as you're dancing the same steps as everybody else and following the same music appropriately, you don't step on anybody's toes. But if you don't, if you're doing, you know, if you're dancing the cha-cha and they're dancing the waltz, it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be really ugly. So that's my suggestion, is that you listen, find out what the traditions are, what are the practices of your net. Try to avoid the things that are wrong. If you have a manual, a lot of nets have a manual. If you have one, don't be afraid to look it up. If you're not sure, look it up. If you hear something and your head tilts and squints and you go, I'm not sure that's right, Look it up. Don't just guess. And the worst thing about nets, and I find about people learning, is and this is it's a bad thing to say under the current circumstances, but they have a viral tendency. When somebody makes a mistake, and particularly the net control makes a mistake, it is the natural human assumption that you know better than they do. And they will adopt your practice. And next thing you know, this virus, this toxic thing you've spread, everybody starts doing the wrong thing because they heard you do it. So it's really important to try to be like Caesar's wife. You know, you need to be better than this. You have to be beyond question. And again, when you're listening to people, you shouldn't assume they know what they're doing. Look it up. It may well be this is somebody who has a strange thing they do wrong, and you can fix it. I'm not a big fan of correcting people on the air. There's no reason to get into a personality fight, but there's no reason for you to just assume that because nobody said anything, it's correct. It may not be correct. I was asked to say something about the net log. What do you log and what don't you log? Well, as a net control station, again, often for nets, these are prescribed to you. You're told what kind of a log to keep. And often they have to be turned in or put into some kind of a form so the person who coordinates the net knows the activity. There's some things that are obvious. You need to know who checked in and at what time. You need to record the net itself, of course, what time it started, what frequency it's on, the name of the net. You want to put down, for each check-in, you want to know the time they checked in. You want to have a place to show the time they checked out. And you want to show traffic that's been assigned to them, traffic they've listed, and be able to tick that off. I usually use a check mark. Some people might draw a line lightly through it. You still want to read the information, but you want to be able to keep track of where you stand on traffic and not forget something. But you want to try to remember where you sent the traffic. If you send somebody another frequency, so it's nice to have a pretty long comments line that you can keep notes on what is happening, what's going on. You want to keep track of the traffic that's been passed, and at the end, they probably want you to total how many messages you take, how many of them were emergency or priority, how many were routine. I wouldn't be counting stuff. So that's the normal kind of a log. I'm trying to think of anything else I remember that's in a log for a net control station. I think that's about it. They're often not very complicated. The larger the net, the more complicated it is to keep track of all these things and be aware of all this stuff. But in many cases, there are participation requirements for people on a net, and you're providing the data that verifies they were present. So it is rather important. One person asked, how do you handle unauthorized traffic interrupting the net? Well, it kind of depends on what you can do and maybe the nature of the traffic. I assume what you mean is somebody just barges in, and there are a couple of things, I guess, on unauthorized traffic. I mean, one is somebody just barges in and makes a net call. Hopefully everybody ignores it. That's the main way to work it. And you can gently say, remind the person this is directed net. All requests for sending traffic must go through net control. I wouldn't personally abrade the person or punish them. I just would remind them of the rule and hope they can take a hint and the fact that they're not being responded to. If somebody just comes on the air and begins sending a digital message, I think you just wait patiently and go on, and eventually they'll figure it out, one would hope. I suppose if you copy it and it's an emergency, we don't want anybody to get hurt. So you definitely would say, just move on and do the best you can to handle it and adapt to it. Here's some good advice. One, for stations having problems getting into an emergency net, one trick I came up with many years ago is to tell them to move around while I'm transmitting. Find a place where I was the loudest and best signal, then freeze and transmit when I stopped. My theory is that by doing this, we're utilizing the best return path. Find that spot, put a nail in it. I'm not sure what you mean moving around while I was find a place where I was the loudest and best signal. I'm not sure what place means and moving around. I guess maybe this is talking about people who are actually on a site and they can, certainly it's true with VHF. It's quite possible they could change their position, hold their handheld and walk around. If they're at a base station, I'm not sure how they're going to move around while you're transmitting. But it is true that there are obstructions. There are parts of the building where you can hear better than others, and that could be a good way of doing it. But it is true to find the best spot and put a nail into it is not a bad idea if you're able to do that sort of a thing. I actually thought the question was going to say something different, so I'll throw this in as well. What if you're trying to log into a net and you're not, net control doesn't hear you? What do you do? A standard practice would be to check in and to say when you're checking in, this is W1EAR, unable to copy net control. And that may be another way to remind people that you need to be relayed in. But that does happen sometimes, and that can be something to work out. I totally agree with this advice. I should have probably said this as well. Also very smart. Probably part of your, add this to your preparation checklist. So recommendation that net controls on high frequency nets program their primary and alternate nets into memory and not use the VFO. So what I really do is create channels. So all you have to do is click the knob and you go to the right channel. You go from channel to channel. You're not sitting there dialing and being off frequency. And the other suggestion is that if you are using a VFO, you should be sure that everybody locks their VFO. You may not realize this, but almost every transceiver has a button that allows you to lock the frequency in so that the dial doesn't work any longer. And that can prevent you from accidentally going off frequency. I guess along these lines, the better you know your equipment, the better off you're going to be and the better you can take care of things. I discovered as getting older, I have a hard time remembering some things, and I do have a transceiver that has 2 receive capabilities. You can transmit, you can jump back and forth, and more than once I've mistakenly left the transmit on the wrong side. So I was receiving on the right frequency, but transmitting on the wrong frequency, and kind of wondering why my SWR was so high and why nobody was hearing me. Well, if you transmit on the wrong frequency, you're probably not going to be heard. So do know your equipment and use your equipment well, and double check to make sure you've got this right. Mr. Heckman, is there an official reference for the procedural language you talked about? Well, there's no single one necessarily. There is actually for the military. There's what's called the ACP. And so there's a number of volumes, but they do prescribe an arbitrary language. Typically, there's a procedural language kind of manual for each kind of net. And again, Google, you can find it, or the people in your net may have one. That's where you'll find this idea. And I strongly encourage a net to adopt something. As I said, the fact that a lot of these things are just arbitrary decisions. That some of them have some basis in rationality, but most of them, it's just that if we all do the same thing, we can dance and not step on each other's feet. And that's what really matters. So that's where you can find it. General nets can I offer some general nets that are both open to newcomers and overlap or see for upcoming? No, I don't really have any great ideas. I would talk to, the most obvious is talk to the people in your ARES organization and see what they would recommend as being a good net to learn on, to get up to speed on. There are a lot of nets are designated as training nets. In fact, these days, probably every net is pretty much a training net, but maybe not everyone, but most. So there ought to be a lot of indulgence of people making mistakes. That's okay. And you can learn what's going on. It really helps to be involved in a net where there are good net control stations, because that can teach you the craft. When I got started, it was with a slightly different organization. It was with the U.S. Navy Military Auxiliary Radio System. I happened to be in Washington, D.C. at the time, and the first time I was net control, and it happens to all of us, so don't be afraid. You just have to go through, I think, almost everybody. Nobody's a natural and does it perfectly the first time. So I made my share of mistakes, and I got a phone call immediately after, which is a good thing, actually. It's great to get the feedback as soon as possible afterward. And the person who was my mentor said, let me start out with a general comment. We're in Washington, D.C. This is the Naval District of Washington. There are top brass listening to our net. We have to be really good. We can't just be good enough. We have to be really good. And here are some things you could work on. And I did, and eventually got to the point where I was considered to be a decent, really good net control station. Cover the use of pro words. So in a number of these procedural rules, I guess in general, we have things that are called pro words. And again, this is to enhance our ability to talk to each other, to have a common language. So we use these words. So one pro word in HF nets is over, and over has a very carefully defined meaning. And then there's out, and out has a defined meaning. It means nothing further. I do not want and do not expect any return communication. Know the meanings of these pro words and use them instead of other language, because they're the way that you really communicate well with people. When you say out, people do it all the time, but it's not technically correct to say nothing further out, because out means nothing further. So you don't have to say nothing further out. You never say over and out. That's a TV movie crazy thing, and that's just nuts. Another term that's used as a pro word is wilco, means I will comply. So when you're told to change frequency, you don't say Roger. Roger says I heard it. That's like a child who tells you, I hear you, Mom, but I'm not going to do it. Wilco says I will comply. It includes in it the idea of I heard you, because in theory you wouldn't agree to do it unless you also heard it. So you don't say Roger Wilco, you just say Wilco. We're trying to get brief. We're trying to get as much compressed as possible, get as much done with the fewest words. Those are things that help you do that. There are a whole number of these kinds of pro words, things about, how do you ask to see how good is your signal? Well, you could just say, how's my signal? but you really should say, I mean, at least the words I'm familiar with from the ACP, it's radio check. You just say radio check, and they have a prescribed way of answering you. So that's the idea of a pro word. In CW, we have pro signs, or in digital traffic, we have pro signs. These are abbreviations and ways of saying things that make it a little tighter without using the full English language. So that's another part of your knowing how to use your net well, is to know your pro words, know your pro signs. Yeah, people can use these days, people have computers, you can use a net logger. If that works with you, for you, that's great. Personally, although I've been using computers for a long time, I tend not to do that because I'm a little nervous I'll make a mistake and I can't recover. The nice thing about writing on a piece of paper is it's there. You can always go back to it. You can see what you did. You can catch up. All kinds of things can be done. So I think that's up to you, but if you're comfortable with it, yeah, use a net logger. That may make it easier for you to do some of the things we're talking about, keep track of things. Sometimes net loggers have macros built into them, and you can type in a few things that'll fill in a lot of the blanks and do the right things for you, and that might be very helpful. Usually a logger will tie into your clock, and it'll get the correct time for you automatically. So there you go. I'm asked, what do I recommend for stations you call in to check in the net after the net's been closed? That's a contradiction in terms. You can't check into a net after it's closed. It's closed. You missed it. Sorry. Don't do that again. Be there before it closes. Am I saying I've never added a station to my list who checked in afterward? Of course I have. But technically no. No, that I'm aware of, at least not many nets conduct evaluations by session or survey. It's a great idea. Well, I don't know by session or survey. I think it's better if there's some kind of system where people get feedback without it being threatening. And I think it definitely can. I don't know how a net can succeed without it. I think if you're not providing feedback to people on the net, it will invariably go to chaos. That's just entropy in its purest form. It will spin out of control. But I know people are very nervous. They don't want to lose members. They don't want to insult anybody. It helps to learn how to say things in a way that is not threatening. You could say things like, I noticed you said over and out. What were you trying to do there? What was your attempt there? But try not to be the disciplinarian or the corrector or the bad guy. Try to help them learn the lesson for themselves, or try to lead them by example and say, in that case, I would have said this. What do you think? Think that might have worked? Oh, for computer crashes. Yes, I believe this will all be available as a recording. Ooh, nice. Thank you to KG6S. God, all the way from California, or maybe. Anyway, that's very cool. Take care of Los Angeles. Very nice. Are there sync services in how you run a net or declared emergency versus a regular weekly net exercise? Probably. I mean, in theory, no. You should be running your net so well that when an emergency happens, it's the same thing. But certainly you're going to be more careful and pay more attention. There's going to be more happening at once. It's not the time to learn how to be net controlled during an emergency. That's the time to know what you're doing and not waste any time and not make mistakes, these unnecessary mistakes. The regular net is a good time to learn things, a good time to let people try it out who haven't done it before, because everybody goes through those first couple sessions when it's a mess. And so that's the time to do it. So I'd say that's the biggest difference, but ultimately they should sound alike. Can areas of categories be logged in your task logbook? Don't know what that means. Is there a net control log sheet that is needed columns? Again, I think if you look online, you can find a number of examples. It has to be something that fits your particular reporting for your net and your system and how it works. Using a handheld, that's hard. I guess it's possible. Here's a suggestion that when running out of time, I guess I'm supposed to finish on time. Don't sit on your mic. The guru says the ARRL has a procedural language guide. It's one of the FSD guide cards. There you go. Do I use Vox? Never. Thank you. Thank you. It's FSD2. Oh, that's the name of the book. It's FSD 220. And look at that. I finished 1 minute early. Steve, I hope you're proud of me. But I hope I've answered your questions. Feel free to be in touch if I can do anything else. All I can say is I encourage you, please get on this adventure. It's a blast. It's one of the best things in radio. At least that's how I feel. So I strongly encourage you, don't be shy. Dive in, give it a try. Recognize the first few times aren't going to be great. Then you start getting better and you feel so good that you've learned something. You've become really good at this. And I wish you all a pleasant evening. Please stay well, stay safe, and keep enjoying our wonderful hobby. And thank you, Steve, for being a fantastic producer. Could never have done this without him. So very fortunate to have his help.
Thank you very much, Carey. And this concludes this session of the 2020 Ham Exposition New England ARES Academy webinar series. Remember to register for future sessions at hamexposition.org. 73, and thanks for attending.